Good morning. I'm Louise Stern. Today is November the 15th, and it is my pleasure to interview Rabbi Emily Korzenik for her oral history for the Jewish Historical Society. Okay. So, Rabbi Emily, where were you born?
I was born in New York City.
Ah. And how did your family come to America?
Oh, my.
And did your parents come to America?
No, long before that. On my mother's side of the family, they came from Germany in the 1840s. There were wars between the French and the Germans, and they left to avoid that. In fact, my grandmother had, it was carried down through the generations, some big silver spoons that had been dug into the ground to prevent the soldiers who would come through and just take everything you had. So they tried to save what they could, then that was one way they saved a few things. They dug it into the earth before they left. And then the next generation were Civil War people who were, of course, in the Union cause. And my cousin, my great-great-great-uncle, I guess it was, who was killed at Gettysburg in 1863, July 1st, at Gettysburg he was killed. He was 19 years old. I have a picture of him in his uniform, and we go from there, from her generation. What really is particularly interesting, I think, about my mother's family is that her father, my grandfather, whom I never knew, and his name was Emil, so they put a Y on it and got Emily, and I was named after him. But he was an only child who came with his parents from Prague. He was 6 months old, and he lived the American dream. That is to say, he went to CCNY, which then was regarded as the poor man's Harvard. And then he went from there to Cooper Union, which was also a free institution, and became an architect in New York, with the first Jewish architectural firm in New York, in, I guess, the country. So in that one generation, we were catapulted into the professional class.
That would be your grandfather or your great-grandfather?
That was my grandfather.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know him, obviously. I was named for him.
Okay, what about your parents?
Well, what about them?
Hmm?
What about
Well, about your father and his
Well,
family.
my father was the first generation born here.
Uh-huh.
His parents came from the part of Poland and Germany that went back and forth. And they spoke German, they didn't know Polish. So clearly they were in the German part of it. And they met here. They were both adolescents, and they met here and had a family here. And my father was their eldest child. And we were very fortunate again. He went into a business that was very new then. It's a whole long story how he got there. He started at CCNY himself, but his father had died when he was about 17 or 18 years old, and he wanted to get to work, and his mother was very disappointed that he didn't stay there. He got into the sort of beauty industry, selling things that were all related to hair and so forth. And he was a very good salesman. My father was a very, liked to tell a good story, laugh easily, very pleasant with people. And he met a man who saw that he was such a good salesman. He wasn't Jewish. His name was Reichman, and my maiden name was Faust. So he invited my father to join him. He had gotten some stuff, I'll call it, from which you made hair dye, which was very new. and he invited my father to join him, but he had to put $200 into the business. Well, my father being my father, and in some ways this was wonderful, he spent $200 on a vacation. he was, we'll have a good time, let's go, let's do things. So he went to his mother, who had enough to just get by, her husband deceased, and she said to him, Eddie, you have nobody in this world to borrow a nickel from. You don't spend a nickel until you have a nickel. So he said, unfortunately, I listened to her because that's not the way you grow a business. However, he joined, the man took him, Mr. Reichman took him without the $200, and they went into business together. And that was when dyeing your hair was a new thing. But I was born in 1929, and you can figure that I'm 87 years old, and we did well in the Depression, which came right on then in 1929. Now, why did we do okay? Because women preferred to dye their hair than to eat, just about. And how you feel about yourself and how you look and what was very important to people. And so we didn't do badly at all as I was growing through my young years.
So tell us a little bit more about your early family life. You have brothers, sisters?
I have an older brother. He's 5 years my senior, and a wonderful big brother. He was into sciences, and he didn't have anybody but me, so he taught me how to play checkers. He tried to teach me how to play chess, but he gave up on it. I just wasn't good enough. But he taught me a lot of things. He taught me about astronomy and there was some lineup of all the planets that wasn't going to happen for X number of hundreds of years, and he would explain all these things to me. And so he really, going to the World's Fair in 1939, 1940 was just wonderful when I was allowed to go with him, because in 1940 I would have been 11 and he would be 16, and I could go with him, and that was wonderful. He knew where to get gum and where to take a ride and what to do it, skipping through, and it wasn't that much fun when I went with my parents by comparison. And he even did that with a few friends. He took a couple of friends and he was allowed to take us in the train, but he didn't want to have anything to do with me and a couple of other little girls. So we will meet here at 5 o'clock to go home, and then he would go off and do his thing. So I really had a very happy time with him. My parents did not have a good relationship, a lot of bickering and unpleasantness in the house, but they stayed together and they were both devoted to their children. My mother was a wonderful mother to a young child, and we were pretty well off, so she could have been out at lunchtime somewhere leaving me but she never did that. She was always there to hear whatever my triumphs or tragedies were of the morning at school.
So tell us a little bit about your education. What kind did you receive?
All right, I think it started at home because my mother had been a elementary school teacher. And so while she was making my bottle curls, she would go over the multiplication table, little girl though I was. So when I was in school, it was me and the boys who were in the front line of doing very well in mathematics, which I loved, if you do well with something. But I got a push really there in terms of education. And my education, I went to public school in the early years. However, I went to private high school because I was taken to a Park Avenue pediatrician who took a shine to me, and he said, I want Emily to go to the Horace Mann School for Girls. Now, my parents had no intention of doing that, but under the advice, he said, I will see that she gets in, you apply. So that's how that came to being, so that in my 10th, 11th, and 12th grades, I was at that school. I went to the public junior high. At the time, it was not 6th, 7th, and 8th, it was 7th, 8th, and 9th. That was,
Which one?
preceded high school
Where?
in Manhattan.
Which number?
So from there, now remember that what was significant at that time, we're talking about the war years, we're talking about the end of the war years, when my own brother was at the University of Pennsylvania in a 5-year course, engineering course. But he wasn't called out until quite late in the war, because they really had the sense to feel that they shouldn't take all their people who were on their education line out. So by the time he was pulled into the war, it was almost over. By the time he got to the Philippines, where he was in the Signal Corps, the war was over. He had to stay there for a year or so, but fine, the war was over. So, but when the war was over and everybody came back, and you remember that everyone who served in the war had the right to a college education for free. Now that did an awful lot for America. Of course, productive lives, but a more productive society. We lived on that for quite a while. We know how different it is today, with students having to pay their way and not being able to do it. So my education was very fortunate again, I feel. I feel so privileged. I feel that, what I tell you, and I just choke up when I think of it, because how many people have had the good, fortunate life that many of us had in America in those years. As a woman, as a Jew, where could you have found yourself in a better place? You know, if I'd been born on the other side of the Atlantic, I wouldn't be here to tell the tale. And also, things were opening up for women. And I lived that. To say that I'm a rabbi, obviously I was one of the very first women.
Tell us a little bit more about that. I know you went to Vassar and graduated from Vassar, and then what?
Well, what happened after that was that I got married. Let me see now.
I'm talking more about your education.
Yes, but that I will. But I'm just going to say that I graduated from college. 10 days later, I got married, and 10 days after that, I turned 20. So, and then I proceeded to have my 4 children. My husband was much older than I. He was 20 years my senior. My father nearly had a heart attack. I mean, literally, he was so upset. And I didn't blame them. I understood that they were thinking of my best interests. However, my friends said to me, only to you could this have happened. Now, why did they say that? They said that because I was a peculiarly mature 16 and 17-year-old. And everybody seemed to say that in some way. My Latin teacher at the high school that I was sent to by the pediatrician said, Emily, you are a womanly child. And so things did happen to me because of that kind of personality that I presented. And but as far as you're asking me more about education,
Right.
and now of course what I did after I was at home having and raising my 4 children. When my youngest of my 4 went to kindergarten, then I went back to Sarah Lawrence to take a master's. Now I wanted to take a master's, an academic master's, in case I wanted to go on to be a college professor. But I didn't do that. I took the courses that you needed to take at Manhattanville College nearby in Westchester, so that I could get the whatever I needed to teach high school. So I taught American history and ancient history
Where?
at the Fieldston School in Riverdale for a number of years, 4 or 5 years. And now I was doing this as my children were growing up. In a sense, it was very good. I was teaching school and in school at the very time that they were going to school. So I had a sense of what their life was more than many parents have an opportunity to have. So that really worked out pretty well, because after all, I was out on vacation when they were. And however, one year I remember the then president, Spencer Brown, principal at the Fieldston, had some woman called who was supposed to teach it. She was just couldn't face it and couldn't do it. And he begged me to take another section because I was teaching half-time. And the poor man was in such straits that I did. My daughter sat me down during that year and said, "You cannot do this. You do not have time for me, enough time for me."
Nothing changes.
But that's what I did for a number of years. And then, you see, after 5 years, which is what I think it was, a friend of mine told me that there was an opening at the Scarsdale High School for 2 sections of American history. Now, that meant that I would be 5 minutes from where I had to go. A rich public school pays an awful lot more money than a private school. And I did think highly of Fieldston in that they gave a lot of scholarships, and they gave them to black kids, and they had, if you were black and you had money, or if you were black and could get a scholarship at Fieldston, that was really an opportunity and a quality of the school that I admired and appreciated. But nonetheless, I was delighted to have this opportunity for myself. 2 sections, half-time, 5 minutes from the house. And since my husband was a lawyer and doing nicely, I wasn't really concerned for the money, but I loved doing it. And I mentioned that because I did something when my kids came in. They had a lot of, they were able to, they could move around for 2 weeks. If they didn't like a particular thing, they could go to another class. So I told them all the work they were going to have, and that was serious. The standards academically at Fieldston were clearly higher than those at Scarsdale High School. I mean, these were not AP people, these were regular classes. So I told them how much work I was going to give them, which in fact was what I was going to give them, and half the class disappeared. So I had 2 small classes, which was lovely too. But at the end of that year, they offered me, they didn't like having part-time people. They did it because they happened to need it. So what they offered me was 4 classes of slow learners. And I knew I wasn't going to be good at that or enjoy that. In fact, I remembered that when I was at Fieldston and the principal came to observe me, he spoke to me afterward and he said, I don't think you realize that any number of the words you used were not necessarily understood by your students. So what I did after that was I said, if you don't understand a word, I say your hand goes up. The words I use will be on your exams, so make sure that you pay attention to that and learn something that you can learn. So I loved teaching, really. I enjoyed it very much. But things got a little too busy at home with my 4 kids and other things that I got involved in, like politics. I ran for the New York State Assembly when it was a new thing for women to do that, in the very first push of women trying to do it. I also ran against the local system in Scarsdale, which was a gentleman's agreement system. and was rather criticized for it by some.
Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's Scarsdale had this nonpartisan system. Suppose sounds very good, really, because then you avoid, parties don't mean anything. But they had a town club only for men, which ran the local system for choosing their leaders, mayor and on down. Now, I didn't like the idea that they didn't accept women. There was a women's club that was, they planted flowers and they put knitted gloves on the Christmas tree and they did nice little things, but they were out of the system and I didn't like that at all. So I got 10 women to sign on to, and not my husband, he said, that's so boring, why would you want to go to those? But that wasn't the point. But I did get a friend in the nearby home to be our sponsors, and we paid our money, and of course they refused us. So I brought a case in federal court in New York because why could I do this? If you're having a private club, you don't have to take anybody you don't want to take. But if you're running the election system, then you're in the public sphere and you can't do that. So I made the point that women were being deprived of their voting rights. Nobody really did vote, you understand. Maybe 100 people went down just to make sure that, but under New York State, they couldn't prevent this. So I got somebody, a nice woman lawyer, who did a terrible job. She did such a bad job that we lost the case. That's a story in itself. But so, this time we're going to appeal. I was in touch with the Westchester leader of the UCLA, the
ACLU.
UCLA, ACLU. And we, who did I get now? I got Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Wow.
Now, at the time, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was teaching law at Columbia, and one of my friend's daughters was in her class. So I went, and this time I didn't know, she wasn't anybody you knew, she was teaching law. So I went and sat in on the class to make sure that this was a good one. Well, I was bowled over. I mean, there she was with her little bun on the back of her head, and she wasn't trying to be charming, she wasn't telling stories that were funny or anything. She gave them meat and potatoes and left the room. Well, I called her and asked her if she would do this, and pro bono, she took it on. I sent her all the materials. We spoke on the phone. She didn't want to know how many children I had or what. We did business for an hour, and she was just fast and furious. And she wrote a brief. Now understand that these silly men had spent $10,000 on legal fees to keep their wives out of the local club. So this time they got the brief and the lawyers told them, forget it, you're gonna lose this. So they didn't. So they backed. The only thing I didn't like about it is we had on the record legally that we had lost the case, but they gave up and recognized that the jig was up and women were going to be invited. Now understand that I had been on the phone with the president of the organization of the men's club, the town club, and he was the first Jewish president they had. And he had never seen me, but he thought I was just the worst thing that ever happened on here. So when I come to the first meeting, women are allowed into, and I raise my little hand widely. He calls on me, and when I announce who I am, you should have seen that man's face. any rate, but it was all fun. It was all, I was invited to be on television also, and I was, because it was so silly. Even, I mean, you could do nothing but laugh about it. So that was my first thing that I did of that kind. And now my husband did not particularly enjoy my activities politically. And when I did run for a local, for the, what I told you about in New York State, he wasn't a bit happy with that. Why? Because I'm not going to be home. I'm going to be running around the place in the evening and speaking and so forth and so on. But it really helped me a lot because, you know, we thought, most of us, that, you know, we weren't as smart as the boys and we couldn't do what they did. Well, I was learning that I was at least as smart as the boys and having a good time doing it. So I was speaking, and I saw that the man who was a Republican, and in my era it was cute to be a Democrat. There were so few of us. It was not threatening, it was just cute. So this guy, I can't think of his name. Oh well, I can't think of his name. I'm not going to be able to.
We wouldn't know it anyway.
Yes, that's right. Gordon Burroughs. I just my own. Gordon Burroughs and I were debating each other. Now suddenly I see that we're moved to the back. We were very near the front. And I went up to one of the people. I said, "Why are we being put now toward the end?" He said, "Well, and Mr. Burroughs requested that." "Oh," I said, "that's silly. We can go home early." So I went to him and I said, "Why?" And he said, "You're too good a debater, and it would make more trouble for me. I have to do a lot of work then to be okay against you." So I asked them to move it to the end. By that time, more people have left. So a backhanded compliment. But you see, I'm learning myself as I go in all of these things.
Can we leave the politics and all of that for
Okay.
just a little bit and come back to it later?
Okay.
And what about your family life? Would you describe it as growing up Jewishly?
Oh, I have to give my mother a lot of credit for that. She was both a proud American and a proud Jew. And she felt she had her head up high for both of them, as I've given you her American background. And as a Jew, I went to synagogue with her for about 3 years on Saturday mornings regularly, maybe at 8, 9, 10 years old. And she saw to that all of the holidays were observed at home, and Friday night supper and so forth.
So you had
And
Shabbat every Friday night.
So we didn't say anything, I mean, but we weren't doing, we really didn't do say prayers, we did not. But Friday night was special, I understood it was, and that was my first, that's right, she didn't do anything about it. My father was active in B'nai B'rith. He was president of the Jordan Lodge. The friends were friends from those connections. My mother was the president of the sisterhood at the Reformed Temple that we belonged to. In fact, she was the president of the New York State's sisterhood too. So I had all of that as my set of expectations. Also expectations that you were philanthropic as best you could be, and that was expected of a Jewish family.
Did you have a Jewish education? Were you bat mitzvah?
Oh, there weren't any
They
bat
weren't bat
mitzvah
mitzvah
for
then,
girls
right,
then,
right.
heavens knows.
Were you
That was
confirmed?
a long time to come. Yes, I was confirmed. I was first in my class. There were about 50 kids in the Temple Israel in Manhattan at the time, and I distinguished myself by my interest and caring. So that was set. So from the time I went to kindergarten till I left for college, I was involved with I was involved at the synagogue then in the youth group.
And how about in college?
Well, college is a place where I think on the whole you're reaching out to the larger world. You're wanting to find out about other things that you don't know. So I would not directly say that at college I had was very involved with that. But because of the realities, there was a quota for Jewish girls into Vassar College. But it was a very generous one. It was 10%. Now we're 2% of the population, if that. So, but Jews want education, and Jews are sending their kids. So one of the first papers I wrote at Vassar was about their admissions policies. And there were two black girls. One was Stradella Lawrence, I remember her name, she had a magnificent singing voice. And it was and one other girl that I remember. And I said, why do you have these policies? And they weren't embarrassed by it in any way. This woman in the admissions office said, well, we don't take more, or we have a limit on the number of Jewish girls we would take because we want dispersion throughout the country. And most of the Jews come from New York or a couple of other big cities, so we feel we can't take more than from New York, and that's why we do it. And I said, what about the blacks, who only have two in whole college? And she said, well, most black don't want to come here, and wouldn't be able to come here, and la la la. So that was my understanding. However, things happened that were very important in my Jewish learning. What was it? In 1947, there was a possibility of Israel becoming a state. And I was in a public speaking class, about a dozen kids. I was the only Jewish one in it. And my young man who was teaching it, whose first name was Chris, is a lovely, sweet gentleman. We had in the class Bedia, who was an Iraqi girl. Vassar liked to have foreign students, and though she was in her middle 20s and older, she was one of those students who were encouraged to come. And it was that day that she had her 10-minute speech to make. Well, what did she make her speech about? But why there shouldn't be an Israel. With such hatred, I was just astonished by it. And I thought, here she's a rich Iraqi woman. Here she has opportunities to do something for her people, or poor, certainly enough. And that's what she wants to talk about for 10 minutes. Well, my nice professor, teacher, motioned to me to stay after class, which I did. And he said, Emily, you should have said something. I said something. I'm totally unprepared for this. What could I have said? However, I learned that the issue was mine, and I'd better get with it. And then it turns out that the debating club of the college, the issue in the dormitories was, and in other colleges too, certainly in the Northeast, should there be an Israel? So I'm debating now, and my boyfriend at the time was a rabbinical student. So I'm discussing these things with him, and he's urging me on to study and be knowledgeable, and of course I did. And I did very well in the dorm debates. So in the spring, the senior girls who were the head of the college debate stuff came to me and invited me to represent Vassar at Columbia. Well, what do you think I did? You have to understand how different it was to be a woman, a girl, then. The idea that I am going to debate with senior boys at Columbia was more than I could. I declined. Well, I told this to my boyfriend. How could could you do this? You had an opportunity to speak up for your people. Can't have even the courage to try. Well, okay, I knew. So I'm learning what I have to know about the world and how I need to gradually proceed it. But you really have to appreciate how different it was, as I am 87 years old, how different it was to be a 17, 18-year-old in college in those days.
How about other instances of, I mean, that wasn't really anti-Semitism, that was anti-Israel. But did you experience
anti-Semitism is the same thing.
Yeah.
And don't think it was ever anything different.
Right. But
Why didn't they want a Jewish state? Because they didn't want anything
okay.
Jewish.
But let's
Yes.
get back to
Yes.
anti-Semitism as
I had
such.
anti-Semitism.
When you were going to high school, when you were going to college.
In high school, okay. In high school, that private school I went to had very few. By the time they got to my class, and Mela Dwadi, his daughter, was in my class, there was not, half the class was Jewish. However, I was president of the class, and the question was, who would we invite to be the minister to make the speeches at our graduation? So I suggested that we have a rabbi, one of them, since half the class was Jewish. Now, a Jewish girl, a brilliant Jewish girl who became a well-known physicist, got up and said, no, we can't do that, because then the school would look too Jewish and people would have a hard time getting into college and it would be bad. Well, I got out of my position as president and I said that is totally wrong attitude and that is unacceptable, and we did. I won the day and we had a rabbi as one of our speakers. So I think that the whole issue of anti-Semitism, though, and that you can call it that, self-made Jewish anti-Semitism, if you will, but within the college experience, I certainly had experiences of anti-Semitism. I was in a math class with a wonderful teacher and two sophomores who were in the same class in my dorm, and we used to do our homework together, the three of us, and chat a bit. And then one time, we did our homework and started chatting, and one of the girls said something anti-Semitic. I can't tell you what it was, I don't remember. But I remembered in that moment that before I left for college, my father, whose name was Edward Faust, said to me, nobody will realize that Emily Faust is Jewish. If you don't tell them before, immediately, find a way to indicate that you're Jewish, and they'll accept you, perhaps, and you can be friends. If you don't do that, they are sure to say something that you can't accept, and then you can't be friends. And I said, oh, Daddy, you're always thinking Jewish. Well, here I am, and this sophomore says something anti-Semitic, and I remember it so vividly, I put my hands up as if I was stopping traffic. And I said, I can't sit here and listen to this. It was something about Jewish businessmen. And there was no embarrassment on their part at all. We chatted a little more, and I left. I was never invited back again. There was never, I'm sorry, nothing. Now, that would not happen today. I mean, somebody would have felt embarrassed themselves, I think. But that was the atmosphere that we were in. And Jewish girls understood that we were apart. We were getting a good education, but we were going to not be in the daisy chain. This is the social stuff. If you were Jewish, didn't matter how pretty you weren't going to be in daisy chain. We didn't care about that, but nonetheless, there was that kind of separation. One other example at college that was telling for me was when we had to raise funds within the college for the community. we were citizens of Poughkeepsie. And I felt and spoke about that we had to be a part of what Poughkeepsie needed. I was a part of a group of kids who did service in Poughkeepsie. I went once a week in the afternoon to Lincoln Center, which was the big black and white mix, but lots of black, where the minorities were, where they had programs for poor kids. I always remember carrying a little guy around who peed on me. But I was doing that, and I enjoyed doing it, and I was sort of the head of it in the college, and I wrote the articles about what we were doing. So I felt a responsibility or awareness of being a citizen of Poughkeepsie, and that we all were while we were there. So when we were raising money for different causes, and the college students did, I made that point and talked about it. And in my own dorm, I went around collecting. Well, this one had one Jewish girl in it. She was sort of the comedian for this group of non-Jewish, largely very wealthy, who went out to dinner because the food wasn't that great, and did that kind of thing. And I came around to collect money from them for this, and they're refusing me. And I looked at this Jewish girl, and one girl did make a contribution. She was the one who wasn't wealthy, and her father was a minister. She gave me something. She wasn't one of those who had a lot of money. And I left. And then I called on this Jewish kid, who actually was
Separately.
I sought her out, and I said, I want something from you, you know better than this. And she came through. But she wanted to be in with them, and was satisfied to be their court jester. Very bright, the sort of person who wrote the musicals for the class. So the atmosphere in a lot of ways were that we were kind of separate. And we knew we were separate, and that was all right.
Mm-hmm.
We expected it. That's the way the world was then.
Right. Well, being 87, you have been through several wars. And can you talk a little bit about how that experience affected you?
I think it affected me very much, particularly the fact that 6 out of 7 million Jews were killed in the process of it all. And I think that sense, and my solid Jewish upbringing, was very much a part of my wanting to become a rabbi. Of course, the possibility didn't exist at that time, but it certainly affected my general attitudes and my...
So let's now talk about your becoming a rabbi and some of your experiences.
All right.
And
becoming a rabbi. There was one young woman who became a rabbi in the Reform movement, whose father was a rabbi in that same Reform movement. I cannot think of her name. I don't think she did too much with it, but there was another woman actually around the time of myself, a little later, whom I got to know. We were constantly being confused about it. But I said to a friend of the family's who was a rabbi and who ran a small academy for Jewish religion, and I told him that I wanted to do this. And he said, "Don't apply, Emily, I won't accept you. I do not want women." Well, a year or two later, he was...
Did he give you a reason?
He didn't want women. Women. There weren't any women. Women shouldn't be
Now,
rabbis.
this was not a reform group. This was,
This was an eclectic group.
Right.
It wasn't the child of any one of the denominations. But look, it hadn't happened yet, and people didn't think it was. I was at a dinner for some Jewish organization, and the man sitting next to me, I introduced myself as Rabbi Emily Korzenik, and I don't think he heard me quite. You know, somebody either addressed me or it came up again, and he turned to me and he said, "How dare you do that to the Jewish people?" Now you have to understand how hostile, even women. And I remember a nice older lady came up to me. I was officiating at a bar mitzvah.
excuse me, just can we have about what year this was?
Oh, all right. Well, remember, I entered rabbinical school I graduated, I was 46 years old. So I guess you can add, I was born in 1929. So, and I was 46 years old.
In the 60s.
Yeah, that's right, 65. Yeah. And I graduated by the time I was ordained. But by the time I was ordained, I was already for a few years with the fellowship. Now, how did that come about? Rabbi Stephen Leon, who was the dean of this little rabbinical school that I was accepted into.
This was not the school where they refused you the first time.
Well, it wasn't the school who refused me, it was the head of the school. I never got to apply or anything. He said, "Don't apply, I'm not going to accept you." Now this was a little later, and Stephen Leon said he saw an ad in the paper, in the Stanford paper. He said, "That's not too far away from you, for a part-time rabbi." And he said, I called, and they said, "We've already had 6 people apply, and we don't think we want to see her." So I don't know why, but he apparently called again. He told me he called again another few months later, and it seemed that they weren't too happy with most of these people who had applied. And whoever answered the phone said, "All right, we'll see her. We'll see her." I guess they thought that'd be fun or interesting. Anyway, it was a very rainy night, worse than my drive up here today, in the evening. And there's a whole big group of about 20 people. Well, everybody came because they were curious. And they asked me questions, and they said what was my vision for what I would do with the fellowship. And I said, "Well, the name of your organization is the Fellowship for Jewish Learning." And I said, "I'm very big on that." And I gave them some idea. And what did somebody say? "How would you feel if we didn't want to do all that learning?" So I said, "Well, it's the rabbi's responsibility to take you where you are and hopefully move you along from that." One person asked me, what difference is there between a woman rabbi and a man rabbi? What do you think the difference is? So what I answered was, well, first of all, I would want the person to be very knowledgeable in Judaism. And secondly, I would want them to passionately want to share it and bring it to others. And thirdly, I would want my rabbi to be someone I could respect. And I said there was nothing like a gender. Gender does not enter into that at all. So I had the interview and I went home and I forgot about it because I didn't, they're not going to take a woman rabbi, but what, so what? I didn't expect it. Sometime in June, I get a call from somebody, I can't think of the name of the woman who was the president, and she says something about Jewish organization, and I somehow think she's soliciting me for some Jewish organization. She said, "You don't understand what I'm saying. I'm inviting you to take this position." Whoopee! So I did. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful for me, and I hope it was wonderful.
And it was
for
wonderful for the fellowship.
fellowship.
Yeah, we can't let this go without you talking about the Poland experience.
Oh, yes, no, I will get to that. I wasn't in there very long before that came along. But I think what was very fortunate was that we didn't belong to any organization. There wasn't Reformed, Conservative, or whatever that we had to pay dues to, but more importantly, that was telling me what to do. So I was really a free agent. I could just run this thing the way I wanted to. And so there were a lot of things that I had in my own agenda. And one, of course, was the way we had Shabbat services every other week. Oh, I should tell you that this lady who was the president of the group took me to the Friends Meeting House to show me where things happened. And she said, I'm going to give you the key because you may be the only person who comes. So that gives you some idea of the dimensions of this situation. And yes, if a dozen people turned up for the service, I'm very happy. But what did we do? I was focused on the fact of study. So if we have a portion of the week, we're going to spend a lot of time. Oh, there were prayers to be said, and they had a paper book that had been put together by somebody, which was badly in need of improvement. So I had my two things. We're going to make a new prayer book. Our first of our 3 prayer books. We're going to make a new prayer book, and at the center of our services is going to be the study of Torah. Here we have a portion, and we're going to study it. And I really wanted participation and discussion, and we were able to have that. And we're going to eat together. So we're going to have lunch together, which creates a greater sense of fellowship and sharing, and everybody brings something and that kind of thing. So those were my initial steps, really. And then something comes along. How do I go, why and how do I go to Poland to do a bar mitzvah? Well, I was doing a lot of weddings. Really, I did 350 weddings roughly by the end of my career, and I was very, very popular. I remember getting 4 calls in one day. I really spent a lot of time over them. I took a lot of time with people. I got to know them. The service was very personalized. I said things in the service that they said about themselves and the meaning of their relationship, and that was fun. But the Poland thing happened because this man, who was a neighbor of mine, he's now deceased, had gone to Israel and to Poland with a group under Federation to see what was going on and to perhaps make a big contribution to Federation and so forth. So they went to Poland and they met this woman who was the head of the canteen, who fed and helped the old Jews that were left in their city. Not Wrocław, but Krakow. And he said, you know, we asked her, we were moved by her, and we asked her, what can we do for you? We thought she'd ask for some citrus fruits, warm clothing, and she said, bring us some life, bring us some youth, bring us a bar mitzvah. And he said, I've been calling them and asking them, I want to do something about this, he said. And I'm not getting any response from the office. Can you do something about it, he said to me. And I said, well, you tell me what you're willing to do. He said, I will see to it that you have the funds to take a family to Poland. So we didn't have a big group, but we had 5 or 6 bar mitzvah kids that year. And I thought, who have I got? I had a kid, Eric Strom, whose grandparents on both sides came from Poland. A cute little boy, blonde hair and blue-eyed and cute and sweet. And I thought, oh, that's a good idea. I call Eric on the phone, and I said, how would you like to go to Poland for your bar mitzvah? And he said, oh, sure, great, that's nice. His mother comes home, Marjorie, and he tells him, Rabbi Emily called and said, would we like to? And so her reaction was, you got something wrong. That wasn't what she would say. Anyway, we talked, and they agreed that they would go, and some of the grandparents went, and we had to find somebody who knew Polish, Yiddish, English, and this lovely, lovely man whom we found, and for the second, his name is...
Jersey.
What?
Jersey, wasn't it? Jersey.
Oh no, that Jerzy Kickler was somebody else. I knew you. No, very handsome, lovely, lovely man who had been in a concentration camp and had survived it. And he and his two daughters and my husband and I and the family went to Poland. And I got a call from a documentary filmmaker who said his grandfather was a rabbi and he made documentaries. Could he come with us to make a documentary of this trip? And I said, well, I'd be delighted to have you, but you have to get all sorts of permissions from the Polish government, which we have gotten for our trip. And you have all of your equipment to take, and you have to go through that. If you can do it, and it was just a few weeks involved, fine, wonderful. Got it. And we all went to Poland together, and that also meant that we had this video of the whole excursion. And we found a group of people, and here's Jerzy Kickler.
Oh.
We found a group of people in Krakow who wanted to be Jewish. They either had two dead Jewish parents, or one Jewish parent, or one parent who wasn't Jewish, but they had some interest in wanting to be Jewish. And they had gotten together. There were about 25 of them. And of course, they were very interested in this, and it was, the word got around. And when we got to Poland, we not only had them and other people who wanted to be a part of this, but we had a cantor from America who heard about it and took himself there and wanted to take over. So we had a little trouble with that. He wanted to take over, and we let him in part. So he was doing some of the service. But and I was upstairs with the women, which was nice too, because I did get to speak to some of these people who could speak English. And we got to the point where Eric was supposed to do the Haftarah stuff, and I came down, and I stood next to him, and he starts fighting with me. I am wearing a tallis, and he pulls my tallis off my shoulders and says, a woman cannot speak in the synagogue. So my husband or somebody handed me another tallis, and I held on tight. And then I realized I'm not going to have a fight with this guy. I'm not going to. So I let go, and he took off the tallis. But I proceeded then to speak and about the portion that we had and how meaningful it was. And he started to try to stop me from speaking, but I went on and people hushed him. And there were a lot of older people there. There were a lot of people came. They heard about it, and the place was full. It was a large synagogue, the one that had been the most liberal one, in that they had a choir of men and women who sang together, and that was a big deal at the time. The place was large, but really broken down. I didn't have a picture with me. They have since redone it, and it's quite a handsome place. How much it's used as a synagogue, I don't know, but it's used for other things as well. So Yurzy Kikla was the head of that group of 25. The person who was the consul from the United States to Krakow was thrilled with us. He hardly ever had anything going on there. He threw a party for us at the consulate. And so Eric had a birthday party there too as well. And it really was an amazing experience. We came back and I wrote it all up, and my first sermon when I returned was about that experience. And Eric was wonderful. He really, little boy that he was, he understood it. He was there to give happiness to other people. And he conducted himself as it. And Mrs. Yakubovich was, she had cooked and cooked when they had, they didn't have everything then, so she made the best of the apples and cabbages and things that she could buy. And it was just a fantastic experience, really.
Well, Emily, we've touched a lot on what your community involvement has been, and I know there's a lot more that you haven't even talked about, and it's sort of ridiculous to ask you what you do in your spare time. I don't think you have any, but I'd like to ask you about the inventions that you've lived to see, and which ones are the most amazing to you?
You mean the physical?
Inventions.
Well, I don't think I have anything to say there that's particularly interesting. I mean, the internet and all of that is both a blessing and a curse, I feel.
I didn't hear what you
I said it's both a blessing and a curse. Because I think some of the things that we're seeing right now with the president that we are about to have, very negative things really that he could get out, that, we're having more nasty people feeling that they can express their nastiness that's coming along as a result of such easy communication.
So touching upon that, and as a segue, what advice do you have for future generations?
Well, I want to just say something, though, about what I did and wanted to do with my Jewish opportunity in Stanford.
Okay.
And what we did and what
Okay,
I
good.
put forward. I think that's really very important. One of the things that I wanted to do was to be a part of the community and a part of the interfaith community. So I started a Black Jewish dialogue group. Now, I actually had a friend and colleague in Westchester who had done that in a huge way. Mine wasn't quite so huge as his, but we did do called there was a title for it.
Black Jewish dialogue, wasn't it?
No. The Community for Mutual Respect. And in the name of mutual respect, we met. First of all, we just had meetings and talked to each other. A half a dozen of each of us. And then we went on to make something more of that, and we had a scholarship program. And we did give out scholarships to the extent of $103 to help kids. At first we thought we wanted them to, just kids who would go to four-year college, but we ended up really sending a lot of people to the Norwalk Community College. But we had, we started them when they were in the 5th or 6th grade. The idea was that you had to get kids to feel that they could go to college and get themselves prepared for it before they could do it. You couldn't spring this on them in the senior or even junior year in high school. They didn't have a focus. They had to have a focus that would make them study more, see that they had a future in this, and that's what we worked on. So we had black kids, mostly black and Hispanic kids. We had one Jewish kid. What?
We had a Haitian one too.
Yeah. Oh, yes. And I think we all got a lot out of doing that together. And you were certainly, Louise, very much a part of all of our outreach, working with the kids and giving them other opportunities. We even had, they went skiing.
And skating.
Ice skating in the ice, because we had access to the ice skating rink. And they came swimming at my house. So we set up a program for them and made some very good friends in the community for ourselves. I think of, she lives...
Louise.
What?
You're talking about Louise?
Yes.
Yeah, I can't remember her last name.
Louise...
Thomas.
Oh, okay. Louise Thomas, yeah. And her daughter, also, yes, and I have been in touch with her by phone.
And Angela.
And Angela, yes, right, her daughter. And a couple of the others who were a part of that program with us together. One of them, Angela Hill, do you remember Angela Hill? She came to visit me not long ago, and we had lunch together, and she's now in Washington, D.C., yeah, and doing very well in her field. Terrific gal, really, just terrific. This is a young woman who took over her cousins, who, the parents, she was a cousin, to parents of children who were on drugs and couldn't take care of their children, and she, in her 20s, took over 2 young cousins to raise. Just an unusual, wonderful girl. So she also was wonderful at talking to them, better than we could. She could say, you've got to do this and you've got to do that, and so forth. So she was a wonderful friend to have and to participate in our program. We had something called Parents of Unmarried Children. That was a program, really was hysterical. Well, we had a lot of unmarried children. So we pooled all our names and we started to have little parties on Sunday from 4 to 6. And, just some drinks and some cookies and whatever, hors d'oeuvres, whatever you wanted to do. And out of that, we got 10 couples married. Now, how did that happen? It wasn't just the people who met. First of all, we knew we had to invite more men than women in order to get an equal number. And where did we get all these men? Well, first of all, they were our children, and they brought their friends, but we knew everybody. This wasn't anybody in the street could come in. We knew who they were. If we didn't like their behavior, they didn't get an invitation again. So it was a very controlled thing. And it wasn't that these people necessarily met somebody there. They made a girlfriend, somebody else. One gal told me, she said, I've made my whole social life from this thing and it was through one of the girlfriends that she met the guy that eventually got married. So we had a lot of fun with that, and I remember that one boy who said to me, my parents would be happy to do one of these parties. And it really wasn't hard to get parents who would have it in their home. And we didn't make them too big either. So people could, and then they could go out to dinner together. There it is, 6 o'clock on Sunday. So it was so good that I thought about starting a dating service, but it didn't work on the television, on our computers. So that really didn't happen. One of the other things that we did in the fellowship was that we took over the things that on Christmas Day, so that our Christian friends could be with their families. The feeding of men in wherever the groups were. You did some of that.
But we did the Pacific House, the shelters.
Right.
We did dinners.
Right.
And we did Thanksgiving at the, it was aid for the, I forget what it's called, ARI. And they had those houses, and we made Thanksgiving dinner, brought Thanksgiving dinner for them and served them.
Yes, yes. And I remember also that for a few years we had,
I think they were the Lotstein houses. That's what they were called.
that we had children who had special needs children